All right, well, this is a special Riding with CW. Haven't done one of these in a while, but there's plenty going on in the PCA of late. We might have thought it was going to be a quiet General Assembly, a quiet spring, quiet early summer. Apparently this is not to be the case. There have been a number of controversies from the MNA thing a few weeks ago to various other things. I think there was actually another ByFaith issue a few weeks ago, and I don't even remember what that was. If that tells you anything about me or about the number of things that are popping up. But as many of you know, yesterday, ByFaith, the denominational, they're not a print magazine anymore, but the denominational organ, which is an online magazine now, published a fairly anodyne article on prayer, but the jumping off point for it was the prayer theology practice teaching of one Karl Barth, B-A-R-T-H, if you're not familiar. He was a mid-century, 20th century theologian, German, Swiss, I think, and he was more Baptist than Reformed, as I recall, but anyway, a very influential theologian on the main line in particular in the 20th century. He's the father of neo-orthodoxy, so-called, and he was just becoming a thing in the 40s. So after Machen, I think it was was it Voss or Van Til or Murray who wrote an early work called I think it was Christianity and Barthianism, or Christianity, I think that's right. I haven't had time to do any research this morning, but he's someone that Machen would have been addressing and interacting with had he lived beyond 1937. There's no doubt about that. I think neo-orthodoxy is viewed as a reaction to the type of Protestant liberalism that Machen opposed, but it was sort of a halfway back to orthodoxy. And you can look up neo-orthodoxy and study it. Most seminarians do have to read some Barth. My pastor has a full set of Barth's works, because as a pastor or a theologian, you probably need to understand it, especially if you deal with a lot of maybe even evangelicalism was affected by Barthianism, the neo-evangelicals for sure. So it's important for most pastors and probably all theologians to understand it. But the question is whether in the public face of our denomination, our denominational organ, our denominational PR outfit, if you will, whether they should, of course they had some qualifiers about Barth, but what was the point of ever publishing an article that put Barth and his thought in any sort of positive light before our people? In a seminary, sure, you wouldn't get lambasted for talking about Barth or reading Barth, because there'd be good reasons to do so. But it's a matter of prudence and wisdom. Why was it necessary? If you didn't have anything else to run, why run that one? There are plenty. If you wanted something on prayer, I'll bet you could find something. My guess is it was just submitted. I think the man who wrote it, who's a PCA minister, his PhD had to do with Barth, and maybe Schleiermacher, who was a full-blown, very influential early Protestant liberal in Germany, and I'm sure he understands the pitfalls. But when you're extremely familiar with a subject, or a subject is the subject of your dissertation or your life study, you may lose perspective, and you may forget that this is actually not appropriate. It seems the editors, it was used in plural, editors, weren't aware of Karl Barth's issues, theological to some degree, but his personal moral issues, where he had I think he had a long-term affair with his secretary who lived with him and his wife. He was not a laudable person. Morally, he was not a good example. There are thousands upon thousands of Reformed pastors of unquestioned orthodoxy who would be a better person to lean on in this case. So this article went up sometime yesterday. I was busy. I probably didn't see it until it had been up 2 hours. It started as a kind of a fiasco from the get-go, because the tweet promoting the article, and I don't know about the article itself on the website, but the tweet promoting the article actually had the wrong headline. It had a picture of people with hands raised. Of course, that's the only way you can worship or pray in some people's minds. Anyway, had a picture of two men in a worship service with their arms around each other, each one hand raised. And it said it was something about the value of physical fitness as stewardship, which is another article they had. So they mixed up the headline and the story, and then they replied to that original tweet and said, oh, here's the real thing. And it was something about Barth and prayer. And I was stunned and flabbergasted when I saw that. The article was up from maybe sometime yesterday morning to midday until after 1 a.m. this morning. So it was up for a good, I'd say 18 hours, 16 hours, I don't know. After it had been up a couple of hours, word started to go around the PCA. It began to be posted about on X at least. I don't know. I'm sure it was on Facebook somewhere. I don't go to Facebook because it's even worse than any other social media, and it's not helpful. But the word got around. People talked about it. Texts were sent. I'm sure I know emails were sent. And the word came down, I don't know, late afternoon, that the article would be coming down. And of course, it did not actually come down. I think it came off the homepage as a featured story, but it was still there. The link was active until probably at least 1 a.m. I know that's when I went to bed, and it was still up. So a lot of people saw it. A lot of people had a problem with it. So let's try to answer two questions. Why did people have a problem with it? And what does it say? And then I guess third, if we can keep our thoughts together, what is ByFaith for? Actually, let's start there. ByFaith is sort of it's a prop. I mean, I'm not using this in a negative sense. It's a propaganda outlet. It's meant to be the public face of the PCA, and also the news source for the PCA. And I think they've done pretty well with news generally. I would question some of their decisions editorially on the news side, but I can't really fault the effort they put into news. But it's in the feature articles that I think there's been an imbalance for a long time, and you just don't read much about vanilla, ordinary means of grace Presbyterianism in ByFaith. I didn't have time to check it this morning, but this, for instance, from way back in 2008 or 10, as I recall, ByFaith did an article on the chapel at Memorial Presbyterian Church. And I think Greg Johnson may have been an assistant pastor at that time, but he was in charge of the chapel. Well, if you are a student of the PCA and you follow things, the chapel is ultimately what got Greg Johnson and Memorial Presbyterian Church in PCA in St. Louis more or less run out of the PCA. He was not defrocked, but the church left under pressure. There's no doubt about that. So PCA's magazine, now online only, featured this innovative ministry. They had a chapel that they didn't really need. It was a fairly large building. It was kind of common. Big, super wealthy churches would have a big worship hall, and then they would have a chapel for prayer or for weddings or smaller events. That was very common. Still find it. This chapel was a little different. It was almost detached. It was on kind of a corner of the building, and may have been physically detached from the main building complex. And they opened it up to local artists in the community, and that became an issue when it was known in 2021, 22. I'm thinking that all sorts of LGBTQIA artists and events were being hosted there, including a film festival with trans people. It was quite, air quotes, queer, if you will. But 10 years before or so, ByFaith had run a glowing article on it. And I think it's probably still up. It was a year ago when I looked it up. Again, I'm working from memory. I'm not sitting before a computer. I'm driving to work. That's how this works. And I'll look it up later and confirm it, but I'll bet it's still there. And that's what ByFaith is attracted to. The innovative, the progressive. I don't mean that in a political, but I mean something that's new and pushes the envelope. And they tend to feature writers and programs from large churches. You know, they've done a lot of articles lately, kind of because the PCA statistics are online now and easier to find. I think they've taken advantage of that, and they've done the largest churches and the largest presbyteries, and that's easier. There's just more data. There's more there with something large, something familiar, something in Atlanta or New York or Charlotte even. That's just easier, but it's not the typical PCA church. So the tendency to gravitate to the innovative, I think that's normal. I mean, you know, if a company had a factory that made screws, that's not very exciting, but they probably got a company PR outfit, or at least an internal newsletter, right? A corporate sort of thing. They probably wouldn't talk about how we make screws a lot. They would talk about things the employees were doing. They would talk about HR programs. They might talk about diversity and equality and inclusion. They might talk about personal stories of the executives or the people who make the screws on the factory floor. But the making of the screw doesn't change much. And that's kind of the problem with the church. The problem, air quotes again, with the church. What we do every Sunday, though it's cosmic and overwhelmingly important, it doesn't change that much, or at least it probably shouldn't. That's not what we read about typically, I don't think, in ByFaith. Now there is some balance, but there's just a tendency, as with news, to the sensational, but with PR and with organizational publications, to the innovative, to the new, to the envelope pushers, to those on the edge. So I think that's a challenge any denominational newspaper or PR organ or website is going to face. And I don't think ByFaith is immune from that. You don't read a lot of boring confessional content in I call it con. If you want to say conservative. If you wanted to say confessional, we're all confessional in some way. But I'm talking about emphasis. If you want to talk about traditional, that just doesn't make really good content typically. And I think that one of the reasons, and this is sort of our fault if I put myself in the con crowd, we would never think of submitting something to ByFaith, because for decades it has not reflected what we think is best and most important in the PCA. So the sort of submissions that they get, we don't relate to, and one of the reasons that's in part our fault. And I think ByFaith is probably open to publishing all sorts of content. So one of the answers to this imbalance is just to provide more content from the con, if you will, side. I mean, there is kind of the con. I'm just going to use the three-letter word con. The con progressive or the con more moderate evangelical divide is real, because I texted someone that I would consider to be in the moderate evangelical or progressive side yesterday with a very I said I think this is unwise and unneeded or unnecessary or something like that. And they said, believe it or not, I agree with you. So right there, it shows the divide is real. You know, you're not going to believe this, but I agree with you. And that shows that this person doesn't typically agree with me, and thought I might be surprised that he agreed with my concern in this case about the Barth article. So there is a problem at ByFaith, and the problem is everyone's problem, and it's you're never going to make everyone happy, and that's not what anyone is asking for. So the problem with Barth, why were people upset? Well, again, he has, I think, arguably a different gospel. He is the theologian of the main line. He is the theologian most prominent in the PCUSA, in the church that the Northern Church, the union of the Northern Church that kicked out Machen, and the Southern Church that the PCA founders left at great personal cost. They literally let goods and kindred go. No one died over it, as far as I know. So this mortal life also not a factor. But that's what the PCA exists because of theologians like Karl Barth being embraced. It's just as simple as that. I think it's another good reason that we don't necessarily. Why would we have N.T. Wright citations in ByFaith? I think you could find several. I think he's still popular in the PCA, but again, he's way out there, and his way of thinking arguably gave us something like the federal vision, and maybe in some other errors that we've seen in the past 25 years. So it's just, we don't need Barth in particular. There's no good reason, and many in the PCA understand why. I think what you rarely get in ByFaith is any sort of church history. Of course, ByFaith did a lot about the 50th anniversary of the PCA, but you're probably not going to read a fairly boring boilerplate history of the PCA, why it was formed. Now, if you go and search, you're going to find the names of founders, you're going to find some reference to it, but it's just not it's not a priority. And there's no context for someone coming to the article about Barth knowing, if they just read ByFaith for the last 5 years, they wouldn't know why there's anything wrong with Karl Barth, I don't think. And that's another thing. What if you have just joined the PCA and you came out of lowbrow evangelicalism and you don't know much about theology, and you read this article and you think, oh, Karl Barth, he must be cool. I didn't read the mild disclaimers attached to the article or included therein. There's just a name. That's a weird name. Let me look that up. And before long, a newcomer to the PCA is getting their fill of Karl Barth. I don't think that's helpful, and I think that's why the article was pulled down. I think that's why I kind of hate this word, because it's not real in a way, but it also refers to something that is real, which is leaders. There's an elite class in the PCA of denominational figures, agency heads, influential people who kind of make the calls on these things, and they're both, they're right across the spectrum. I think generally they all agreed this was not a good look. The article came down eventually. But there's no way that a new church member to the PCA would have that perspective. We are sort of, this is not a theological journal where we can cite all sorts of theologians and nuance it and footnote it and all that. This is just a bad move to put Barth before the broad membership of the PCA. Imagine if you just come out of the PCUSA, you'd been in a liberal church, you'd finally had all that you could stand, and you just joined a PCA church after painful years of deliberation and parting with family members and people that you loved. You leave your old PCUSA church with its beautiful building with 40 people in it, and you join the PCA church across town, vibrant church, 250 members, lots of young families, the gospel's preached, and you think, well, this PCA is great. I'm glad I joined it. Surely there's like a magazine or a website. So you find ByFaith by the PCA, and you log in, and there at the top of the page, praying with Karl Barth. And maybe you were one of those people in the PCUA that knew enough to know that was not a good thing. It would scandalize you too. So there may be members this scandalizes, and there may be members that this leads astray. It was stunning. It's good that it came down, but it never should have happened. Now, I think in the tweets that kind of explained why we're taking this article down, and there was an apology in there. I think it was the editors, plural, more or less confessed some ignorance of Barth's theology, but greater ignorance of the moral problems attached to him, and that's pretty surprising. Now, I don't guess we require the people who run our denominational website to be church history or systematic theologians, church history professors or systematic theologians or experts, but you'd like to think we'd do better than that, and I hope we will in the future. So this whole controversy, which some may view as a tempest in a teapot, but I think it is actually a big deal, and it does say something. And let's end with this: the diversity in the PCA. The PCA is almost numerically insignificant in the broader U.S. landscape, culturally and religiously. We've always had this pretension that we're very influential and we're thought leaders and we, quote, punch above our weight. And that's been said many times, but really we're insignificant. But in the Reformed world, we're the 800-pound gorilla in the conservative confessional Reformed world. In NAPARC, there are 600,000 members in the churches, the 12 or 13 churches associated with NAPARC, North American Presbyterian and Reformed Council. And the PCA is 2/3 of them. The PCA is more than 10 times as large as most, if not all, but most of the churches in NAPARC. So we're large and we're geographically diverse. Unlike when we were founded, we were mostly a southeastern church. We were an SEC church back then, and now we cover all the conferences. To use a sports metaphor, so because we're diverse geographically, and we're going to be diverse in other ways, and excuse me, I have to change lanes. That diversity is reflected in ByFaith, and sometimes I think it's magnified by what we see there. There's a lot more there's a lot more diversity of practice than there is of doctrine in the PCA. The PCA is not complete. It is not monolithic on theology. But I've said many times there are no theological liberals in the PCA. There may be a few that are on their way out, or short timers, or soon to be gone, or they may be hiding deeply. But for all practical purposes, there's no one who doesn't believe in the inspiration of Scripture, in the virgin birth and miracles, in Christ's resurrection, in inerrancy, although there's probably little range in how to interpret the concept of inerrancy even. But there's 99% agreement on those basic fundamentals of the faith. But when it comes to how we view the standards, how we view worship, how we view justification and sanctification, there's more diversity there. But when you get to practice, there's a huge range. That's in worship practices, so-called philosophy of ministry, which means what you do, whether you're focused on Lord's Day activities or programs or community redevelopment, redeeming the city, all the tropes. There's much more diversity there, and ByFaith is not going to write about things we all agree about, probably. There's not a lot of basic theology series going on in ByFaith. What's written about is practice, the practical outworking of these things, and we see the diversity, we see the range. And this was not a practice, but the surprising, and you expect to log on to ByFaith and see, to read about things that your church probably wouldn't do or couldn't relate to. But what you don't expect is to log on and see the 5 letters BARTH. You don't expect to see Karl Barth being, the headline, the very presence of the article was at least a very mild and qualified commendation of Karl Barth. And that should never have happened. There's just no good reason for it. There's nothing you can get from Karl Barth that you couldn't get better somewhere else. I think the article kind of commended Barth in as far as he agreed with Calvin and Luther, and I forget who else. But you don't need the Barth part. We've got the resources of the Reformed faith and our church history, and there's no need to interject a theological alien, the hero of the main line and the most influential. Arguably neo-orthodoxy, although it was probably meant to save the main line from liberalism. I don't know how the main line could be in worse shape today. I don't know how it could be much less faithful if you look at the whole main line, or just the PCUSA, or just you might even include some of the more liberal Dutch churches in there. So no need for Barth. I think I tweeted, don't Barth my PCA, not even a little bit, and I think that's a reasonable wish to avoid that. There may be some soul searching at ByFaith. I've heard there may even be overtures seeking to address things at ByFaith. There are going to be a lot of overtures this year, and a lot of them are going to have to do with agencies and things that go on in the PCA, and they're going to be contentious. Probably not all going to pass, but they're going to spur debate. But no one in any part of the PCA woke up yesterday morning wanting to fight about ByFaith and Karl Barth. That was imposed on us. That was put in our face. I don't think intentionally with any malice. I think it was a mistake. But the fear is it may be a mistake that implies something about either the top level of the PCA leadership, so-called, because no one in the PCA technically has any more power as a church, as an elder than anyone else. But we know in a large organization that power becomes a top-down thing. We're still fairly grassroots in many ways, but there's a centralizing tendency, a concentration of power in a large organization, and the PCA is a relatively large and complex organization at the agency and management level. Although if you went to our headquarters in Atlanta, you would see it's not very big. It doesn't have a whole lot of people. So you should not imagine that there's a big building with a large bureaucracy and millions of dollars to play with. That's just not the case. That's not the PCA. But we don't want to become that, and I think that's the point. So I'm not going to say that we should be thankful for this little crisis. We should be thankful for how it was resolved, but we shouldn't be thankful that it happened in the first place. But it might prompt change of some kind. It might prompt soul searching, and we'll see. So Overture show Thursday night. This issue may come up, although it will not be there's no overture addressing ByFaith, but there are a lot of there are overtures that address organizational and management issues in the PCA, and I'm almost sure this will come up, if not now, before long. So thanks for listening. I hope the audio's good. This is the first Writing with CW in the new Press Bureau 2, and who knows if it worked. You may never hear this, but thanks for listening.